On this day in sports history, 1979, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird make their NBA debuts for the LA Lakers and Boston Celtics, respectively. Both would begin their careers with wins as the Lakers beat the San Diego Clippers 103-102, and the Celtics defeated the Houston Rockets 114-106. Magic would score 26 points with 8 boards and 4 assists in 41 minutes, while Bird would play 28 minutes and post a 14-10-5 stat line. Magic and Bird were tied together their entire careers after Magic's Michigan State Spartans beat Bird's Indiana State Sycamores 75-64 in the Final Four on March 26 of that year. The two would meet up 3 times in the NBA Finals, with Bird winning the first matchup in 1984, while Magic and the Lakers would win the other 2 encounters in 85 and 87. On a side note, Chris Ford would score the first 3-pointer in NBA history in the Celtics' win over the Rockets. On this day in sports history, 1989, the Dallas Cowboys would trade Herschel Walker to the Minnesota Vikings in a transaction that would define a franchise. The trade would eventually involve 18 players and draft picks, with the Cowboys, who finished 1-15 the previous year, sending Walker to the Vikings along with 4 draft picks in exchange for linebackers Jesse Solomon and David Howard, cornerback Isaac Holt, defensive end Alex Stewart, and the Vikings' first, second, and 6th round draft picks in the 1990 draft. The Cowboys would eventually use those picks to take Emmitt Smith and Darren Woodson. At a press conference announcing the trade, Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson bragged that he committed the great train robbery, even though many writers criticized the trade at the time. The Cowboys would use these acquisitions to eventually go on and win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, beginning in 1993. Walker would only play 2 seasons with the Vikings, never surpassing 1,000 yards rushing. On this day in sports history, 1998, New York Rangers 34-year-old center Pat Lafontaine announced his retirement from the NHL due to a series of debilitating and increasingly dangerous concussions. Lafontaine, who suffered at least 8 such incidents in his 15-year career, would score 468 goals and 1,013 points in 865 games, but it was a collision with his teammate Mike Keane that would end his career. Lafontaine first knew there were issues when, in the final game of the 96 season against the Philadelphia Flyers, the rink was spinning in his vision, something that he said terrified him at the time. The Hall of Famer would later admit that he fell into a deep depression due to post-concussion syndrome. Now 55, Lafontaine works with children and their families in his Companions in Courage Foundation to help overcome life-threatening obstacles, but still weighs in on the concussion issue from time to time, with perhaps his best advice being, the worst thing you can do is come back too early. On this day in sports history, 1965, LA Dodgers pitcher Sandy Koufax would record his second shutout in this World Series as his Dodgers beat the Minnesota Twins 2-0 in Game 7 to claim the title. Manager Walter Alston started Koufax on just 2 days' rest, opting to sit Don Drysdale, who would have been pitching after 4 days off. Alston made it clear that Drysdale would come in if Koufax faltered. Twins manager Sam Mealy made a similar decision when he started Jim Kaat, who was also working on only 2 days' rest. Kaat gave up both runs in the 4th inning, with Mealy eventually using 4 relievers to shut out the Dodgers the rest of the way. Mealy would go on to say, "You hate to lose, but we didn't disgrace ourselves. We were beaten by the best pitcher that there is anywhere." On this day in sports history, 1979, Edmonton Oilers center Wayne Gretzky scored the first goal of his NHL career. Gretzky's first marker came in a 4-4 tie against the Vancouver Canucks and goalie Glenn Hanlon. Gretzky would go on to score 51 goals in his inaugural season, then a record for rookies. Teemu Selanne of the Winnipeg Jets would later surpass that mark as he tallied 76 goals in his 92-93 rookie season. While Gretzky no longer has that distinction, he does have a total of 61 NHL records, 40 in the regular season, 15 in the playoffs, and 6 more in the All-Star game. Gretzky would finish his 20-year career with 894 goals and 2,857 points in 1,487 games, totals that are not likely to be surpassed. Gretzky's brother Brent played 2 years for the Tampa Bay Lightning, recording a goal and 3 assists in 13 games. Those 4 points are good enough to set the NHL record for career points by brothers, well ahead of Daniel and Henrik Sedin, twins who played for the Vancouver Canucks and whom both recorded more than 1,000 points apiece in their 17 years in the NHL. On this day in sports history, 2003, Chicago Cubs fan Steve Bartman reached for a foul ball off the bat of Florida Marlins Louis Castillo, deflecting it away from Cubs left fielder Moises Alou. While that play would have only been the second out of the inning, it definitely changed the course of Game 6. The Bartman miscue sparked an 8th-inning rally that saw the Marlins score 8 times to win 8-3 and force Game 7 in the NLCS. The Cubs would go on to lose the series the next day when they fell 9-6 to the eventual World Series champion Marlins, who would beat the New York Yankees 4-2. A few things of note: an attorney sitting behind Bartman actually ended up with the ball and sold it at auction to Harry Carey's restaurant for $113,824. In February of 2004, special effects coordinator Michael Lantieri would drill a hole in the ball and blow it up, with MC Tim Walco telling the crowd, "You're now looking at $113,000 worth of string." The remains are on display at the Chicago Sports Museum. The Cubs would eventually end their 71-year World Series drought when they beat the Cleveland Indians in 2016. The Cubs presented Bartman with a World Series ring, and when asked by a reporter what he thought of the gesture, Bartman, who has managed to live a relatively private life after the incident, stated, "Although I do not consider myself worthy of such an honor, I am deeply moved and sincerely grateful." On this day in sports history, 1968, Jim Dorey of the Toronto Maple Leafs would be assessed a then NHL record 48 minutes in penalties in a game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Dorey set the record with 8 penalties in his NHL debut and was fined $175 for being the catalyst of a second-period brawl. There have been 8 other players to earn at least 44 minutes in the sin bin in a single game. LA Kings' Randy Holt would set the new record when he racked up 67 penalty minutes in a March 11, 1979 game against the Philadelphia Flyers, who were once known as the Broad Street Bullies. Holt earned 20 minutes of time in the penalty box in the first period, but felt he had been given a cheap shot by Flyers bad boy Ken Linsman, which would eventually lead to a bench-clearing brawl. Holt earned an additional 45 minutes, as well as a triple-game misconduct, and would later serve a 3-game suspension. On this day in sports history, 1969, the New York Mets beat the Baltimore Orioles 5-3 to win their first World Series title, 4-1. The Miracle Mets, who bookies had at 100-1 odds to win the series, would lose Game 1, but managed to reel off 4 straight wins behind the pitching of Hall of Famer Tom Seaver and Jerry Kosman. Coming into the '69 season, the Mets had never won more than 73 games in their first 7 years in the league. But after they overtook the Chicago Cubs and won the NL East behind a 100-win season, the Mets would sweep the Atlanta Braves in the best-of-5 NLCS, setting up their first trip to the World Series against the heavily favored Orioles. The final out of the series came off the bat of Orioles second baseman Davey Johnson, who would later to go on to manage the Mets and lead them to another World Series title in 1986. On this day in sports history, 1976, Toronto Maple Leafs forward Lanny McDonald recorded a hat trick in just 2 minutes 54 seconds in a game against the Philadelphia Flyers. McDonald would start the scoring at 8:24 of the first period when he took a pass from Leafs center Darryl Sittler and scored on Flyers netminder Bernie Parent. Sittler would set up McDonald for his second goal just 61 seconds later. The Leafs captain would then take a pass from defenseman Ian Turnbull and feed McDonald for his hat trick at 11:18 of the first frame. Parent would give up 4 goals in the first period and be pulled in favor of backup netminder Gary Innes, who gave up just 1 more marker as the Flyers came back to tie the Leafs at 5 goals apiece. While this feat is amazing in itself, it pales in comparison to the NHL record owned by the late Chicago Blackhawks right-winger Bill Mosienko, who scored 3 goals in just 21 seconds in a game against the New York Rangers on March 23, 1952. On this day in sports history, 1974, the Oakland A's beat the LA Dodgers 3-2 in Game 5 of the World Series to win their 3rd consecutive title. The A's had banner years from pitcher Catfish Hunter, who recorded 25 wins in the regular season, Reggie Jackson, who had 105 RBI, and speedster Billy North, who swiped 54 bases. The A's dynasty was not without its problems, as Oakland became a running joke in the American League for their locker room meltdowns and intra-squad theatrics. The A's won a 5th consecutive division title in 1975, but were swept by the Boston Red Sox after losing Catfish Hunter to free agency. Facing the loss of 9 more players in the offseason, Oakland traded Jackson to the Baltimore Orioles. Jackson would play a single season for the Orioles before joining the New York Yankees in 1976, where he would earn the nickname Mr. October as he helped the Bronx Bombers to back-to-back series wins in 1977 and 1978. On this day in sports history, 1989, Game 3 of the World Series between the San Francisco Giants and Oakland A's was canceled when a 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck the Bay Area. The game was scheduled to start at 5:35 p.m. local time, and TV cameras were running when the quake struck at 5:04. The epicenter was located just 60 miles away near Loma Prieta Peak. Lasting 15 seconds, it was the most powerful earthquake ever to hit a populated area in the US, killing 67 people, injuring another 3,000, and causing more than $5 billion in damage. Game 3 would be played on October 27th, with the series ending the next day as the A's swept the Giants with a 9-6 win at Candlestick Park. On this day in sports history, 1991, Paul Coffey broke the NHL scoring record for defensemen as the Pittsburgh Penguins beat the New York Islanders 8-5. Coffey set the record when he recorded 2 assists in the win, giving him 1,053 total points and surpassing Islanders Hall of Famer Dennis Potvin. Coffey set the mark in just 815 games over 12 seasons, besting Potvin's totals, which took him 1,060 games in 15 campaigns. Coffey would play 9 more seasons and finish his 21-year career with 1,531 points in 1,409 games. Coffey is best known for his years in Edmonton, where he helped lead the Oilers to 3 Stanley Cup championships. The Hall of Famer would win a 4th title with the Pittsburgh Penguins in 1991.